In April 2025, a news report sliced through the polished image of the Pawn Stars celebrity like a cold, sharp blade. A man once adored by millions for his sharp business wit and charming persona. Rick Harrison was arrested on accusations so shocking they rattled the very foundations of his fame. The charges levied against him: human trafficking, money laundering, illegal antiquities trading, and running an organized criminal enterprise were unimaginable for fans who had followed his rise on television. Rick, once seen as a beloved icon, now faced an eerie and unsettling reality. As Rick was escorted into the federal courtroom, his wrists bound in steel cuffs, the gravity of the situation settled in. His once charming smile was gone, replaced by a gaunt face, and his eyes, which had once sparkled with quick wit, appeared hollow and lost. It was a scene that stood in stark contrast to the vibrant persona that had captivated millions. The man who had once held the position of a trusted authority in the world of rare collectibles and antiques now stood in front of the law, facing allegations that painted him as the mastermind of a dark and twisted empire. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence, the kind that only comes when the weight of a scandal begins to sink in. The charges outlined in the 200-page indictment were chilling: human trafficking, illicit antiquities trading, money laundering, and organized abuse were just the tip of the iceberg. The once glamorous gold and silver pawn shop, a symbol of the American dream for many, was now the beating heart of a criminal enterprise, its shady dealings hidden in plain sight. It's the very antiques that Rick had showcased on television, which had once captured the hearts of audiences, were now being scrutinized as potential covers for much darker transactions. As the prosecution presented evidence, including detailed ledgers and encrypted emails from locations as far-flung as Serbia and Dubai, the narrative that began to emerge was one of a global network operating under Rick's seemingly innocent facade. Each new piece of evidence only deepened the mystery, raising questions about the true nature of his empire. Were the antiques Rick so expertly appraised merely fronts for trafficking victims, cataloged and traded like merchandise? The ledger books discovered in Rick's safe painted a horrifying picture of human lives reduced to inventory numbers. Each entry was coded, leaving chilling implications about what lay beneath the surface. Among the most devastating revelations came from a victim named Jane, a young woman rescued in Reno, who testified with trembling lips about being forced into the human trafficking ring. She described how she had been assigned a number, antique item code 1974. Jane recalled hearing cries from within wooden crates, her voice barely audible above the echoes of what seemed like an underground operation. Her testimony struck the courtroom with the force of a freight train, as it was revealed that these items were, in fact, real human beings who had been enslaved and transported across borders for exploitation. But it wasn't just the testimonies from victims that rocked the case. A former employee of the pawn shop, who had once worked as an assistant, stepped forward and admitted that he had been a part of it all, albeit under duress. The employee confessed that he had witnessed countless shady deals involving stolen antiquities, drugs, and weapons, but had been too scared to speak out. His confession added another layer to the complexity of the case, suggesting that Rick had been the mastermind behind the operation, or was he merely a puppet for a far more dangerous and powerful figure? As the courtroom drama unfolded, the case began to take on a new dimension. Was Rick Harrison truly the criminal mastermind, orchestrating an international crime syndicate? Or was he just a fall guy, caught up in something much larger than himself? The evidence against him was damning, but the question remained: was the case truly about justice, or had the media already painted Rick as a villain before the truth could even be revealed? The media frenzy reached its peak as the hashtag Rick Harrison death sentence spread like wildfire across Twitter, sparking intense debates and polarizing the public. Rick's loyal fans argued that he was being framed, while others argued that no one, regardless of their fame, should be above the law. Some posts accused the media of sensationalizing the case, while others demanded justice for the victims who had suffered at the hands of Rick's criminal empire. The intensity of the online debate only fueled the tension in the courtroom, where both sides fought for control of the narrative. The public's obsession with Rick Harrison's fate reached unprecedented levels. Fans of the Pawn Stars show, who had watched Rick's wit and charm on TV for years, were now left questioning everything they thought they knew about him. Was the man who had made his fortune selling antiques truly the villain in this story, or had he been manipulated by more powerful forces? Was he the mastermind, or was he simply a pawn in a much larger game? But the deeper the investigation went, the more questions emerged. The FBI's Pale Pawn operation, which had initially leaked information about Rick's alleged criminal activities, was shrouded in mystery. Key evidence, including surveillance footage and handwritten ledgers, had been leaked to the media, but none of it had been independently verified. Was the FBI playing its cards too aggressively, or was there something more sinister at play behind the scenes? One of the most troubling aspects of the case was the sudden disappearance of a key witness, a trafficking victim who had been scheduled to testify against Rick. Was this merely a coincidence, or had the FBI been negligent? Or was this part of a carefully orchestrated effort to silence the people who had come forward to expose Rick's criminal network? The mystery only deepened as new information began to surface. About Rick's connections to shadowy figures in the Middle East and Europe, figures whose names had been deliberately hidden from public view. The web of intrigue surrounding Rick's case was becoming more convoluted by the day. As the trial continued, the question remained: was Rick Harrison really the criminal mastermind behind this international syndicate? Or was he simply a pawn in a much larger conspiracy? The media, hungry for answers, continued to sensationalize every detail of the case, while public opinion became increasingly divided. In the end, what was clear was that this case was far from over. The twists and turns of the investigation, the trial, and the revelations about Rick's dark past promised that this story would continue to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. In the days following the shocking developments in the courtroom, Rick Harrison's fate became more uncertain with each passing hour. As the media storm intensified, new evidence emerged that further complicated the case. The public's opinion was torn between those who still believed in Rick's innocence and those who were convinced he was the mastermind behind a criminal empire that spanned the globe. The mystery surrounding Rick's involvement in the criminal network was only deepened by the revelations from key witnesses and the mounting evidence against him. The FBI's investigation continued to unearth new details that painted a grim picture of the once-beloved pawnshop king. One of the most shocking pieces of evidence came from a former associate of Rick's, a man who had worked alongside him for years at the gold and silver pawnshop. This man, who had once been a trusted member of Rick's inner circle, came forward with a harrowing confession. He described the operation Rick had run, detailing how the pawnshop had been used as a front for human trafficking and the illegal antiquities trade. According to this former associate, Rick had been using his celebrity status to shield his criminal activities from public scrutiny. The man spoke of how Rick had always been careful to keep his dealings under wraps, but as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Rick's criminal network was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The former associate recounted how Rick would often boast about his ability to outsmart the authorities, bragging that his fame and public image would protect him from any legal consequences. But as the walls closed in, Rick's bravado seemed to falter. The once confident and charismatic man, who had captivated millions on television, now seemed broken, as if the weight of his actions was finally catching up with him. As the trial continued, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Victims of Rick's trafficking ring began to speak out, sharing their harrowing stories of exploitation and abuse. One woman, identified only as Lisa, told the court how she had been lured to Las Vegas with promises of a career in modeling, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare of forced labor and sexual exploitation. Lisa's testimony was heartbreaking as she described how she had been kept in a locked room for days at a time, drugged and coerced into participating in illegal activities for the benefit of Rick and his associates. Her courage in coming forward added a new layer of complexity to the case, as it became clear that the crimes Rick was accused of were not just about money or power. They were about the lives of real people who had been trapped in his web of exploitation. Yet, as these testimonies unfolded, doubts about the integrity of the case began to surface. There were inconsistencies in some of the victims' stories, and a growing number of conspiracy theories began to circulate online. Was Rick truly the mastermind behind this network, or was he being set up by more powerful figures who were seeking to silence him? Some commentators speculated that Rick had been manipulated into taking the fall for a much larger criminal enterprise, one that involved high-ranking officials and business tycoons from around the world. This theory gained traction when leaked documents revealed that Rick's name had been linked to a shadowy group of individuals whose involvement in the illegal antiquities trade stretched back decades. These figures, whose identities remained hidden, were believed to have used Rick's pawn shop as a cover for their illegal activities, allowing them to smuggle stolen artifacts and launder money through the business. The more the investigation dug into these connections, the more it appeared that Rick was merely a pawn in a much larger game, a game in which the true masterminds remained elusive. As the trial progressed, the defense team, led by a team of high-profile attorneys, continued to deny the charges against Rick. They argued that the evidence presented by the prosecution was circumstantial and that there was no concrete proof linking Rick to the criminal network. In their defense, they pointed to the inconsistencies in the testimonies of the victims and suggested that Rick had been the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by those seeking to destroy his reputation. But despite their efforts to cast doubt on the case, the tide of public opinion was turning against Rick. The media, once quick to celebrate his rise to fame, now seemed determined to tear him down. Headlines about his arrest, his connections to the criminal underworld, and his fall from grace dominated the airwaves. Social media platforms like Twitter and Reddit exploded with posts discussing Rick's trial, with users speculating about the true nature of his involvement in the criminal activities. The hashtag Rick Harrison guilty trended for days, and the once popular Pawn Stars star became a symbol of betrayal and corruption. As the case drew closer to its climax, a new twist emerged. A previously unknown figure, a former associate of Rick's from his early years in the pawnshop business, came forward with a startling revelation. This person, whose identity remained protected for fear of retaliation, claimed to have witnessed Rick's involvement in the trafficking ring firsthand. According to this individual, Rick had been directly involved in coordinating the shipments of stolen antiquities and trafficking victims, using his status as a television star to avoid detection by law enforcement. The testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom, as it provided the missing piece of the puzzle that had been eluding investigators for years. The defense team was left reeling, and the prosecution pressed its advantage, presenting a damning array of evidence that painted a picture of a man who had used his fame and influence to exploit the most vulnerable members of society. Rick Harrison, once a symbol of American success and the embodiment of the American dream, now found himself standing trial for crimes so horrific they seemed to defy belief. The trial of Rick Harrison was not just a legal battle, it was a battle for truth and justice. It's a battle that would have far-reaching implications not only for Rick's fate, but also for the entire entertainment industry. As the courtroom drama continued to unfold, one question lingered. Was Rick the mastermind behind the criminal network, or was he simply a pawn in a game much larger than he could ever have imagined?